Welcome to Laura's English Vibe.
The hidden cost of cheating. Two students walked into the same examination room. They were the same age. They had attended the same school for years. They laughed at the same jokes. They worried about the same future. If you had looked at them that morning, you probably would have thought they were living the same life. In many ways, they were. Neither of them was a genius. Neither of them was lazy. Both wanted to make their parents proud. Both dreamed about getting into a good university. Both believed that one examination could change everything. The room was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. Papers were handed out. Pens touched the desk. Then, something happened. One student looked at the questions, took a deep breath, and began writing. The other looked at the same questions and realized he wasn't ready. His heart started beating faster. He looked around the room. No one was paying attention. His mind whispered something so quietly, he almost didn't notice it. Just this once. Not forever. Not every exam. Just this one. Just enough to get through today. Just enough to protect his future. It didn't feel like a life-changing decision. It felt like survival. An hour later, both students walked out of the classroom. They smiled. They talked with friends. They wondered what score they would receive. Nothing looked different. If you had seen them leaving the school that afternoon, you would never have guessed that one small decision had already begun shaping two completely different lives. The examination ended. The real story had just begun. One small decision. People often believe that our lives change because of the biggest moments. Graduation, marriage, a new job, moving to another city. But I've lived long enough to notice something else. The biggest moments usually arrive after hundreds of smaller ones. They're not the beginning. They're the result. The real turning points are often so ordinary, we don't even notice them. That examination was one of those moments, not because of the score, because of what happened inside each student after it was over. The first student went home feeling uncertain. He wasn't sure if he had passed. He replayed every question in his mind. There were answers he knew he had gotten wrong. He felt disappointed, a little embarrassed. He wished he had studied more. That night, he opened his textbook again. Not because someone forced him to, because he didn't like the feeling of not understanding. The second student had a very different evening. His score would probably be higher. His parents would probably be happy. His teachers might even congratulate him. Everything seemed to work out perfectly. So why couldn't he stop thinking about the examination? Because deep inside, he knew something that nobody else knew. The paper didn't tell the whole story. The score wasn't really his. And that strange feeling followed him home. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a tiny stone in his shoe. Easy to ignore, impossible to forget. There is something fascinating about the human mind. It doesn't only remember what we do, it remembers why we do it. When we repeat the same decision again and again, our brain slowly stops asking whether it's right. It only asks whether it works. That's how habits are born. Not through one enormous mistake, through many comfortable ones. The first shortcut always feels unusual. The second feels easier. The third hardly feels like a shortcut at all. One day, it simply becomes the way we solve problems. And that's what worried me when I first thought about this story. Not the examination, the pattern. Because patterns have a quiet way of following us into places we never expected. A classroom today, a workplace tomorrow, a family someday. A whole life, built one decision at a time. Years passed. The two students graduated. Both were accepted into university. Both posted smiling photographs online. Friends congratulated them. Relatives celebrated. Looking at those pictures, you couldn't tell which student had cheated. Because life doesn't reveal its lessons immediately. It waits, patiently, sometimes for years. University was harder. The subjects became more difficult. The expectations became higher. The first student struggled. There were nights when he wanted to quit. There were assignments he didn't understand. Sometimes he received disappointing grades. But something had quietly changed inside him after that examination years earlier. Whenever he faced a difficult problem, his first instinct was no longer, "How do I escape this?" It became, "How do I understand this?" The answers didn't come quickly, but little by little, they came. The second student also struggled, perhaps even more. But his mind had learned a different lesson. When pressure increased, his first instinct wasn't to learn more. It was to look for another shortcut. Old habits have remarkable memories. They return when life becomes uncomfortable. Not because we're weak, because they're familiar. And in stressful moments, the familiar often feels safer than the right thing. I don't think either student realized what was happening. Neither one woke up one morning and decided, "This is the kind of person I want to become." Life rarely works that way. We become someone gradually, almost invisibly, like a river shaping a rock. Not in one day. Not with one wave, but through thousands of tiny moments that seem too ordinary to matter. Until one day, the shape is completely different. People often ask when character is built. I don't think it's built during the moments everyone is watching. I think it's built in moments exactly like that examination, when no applause is waiting, when no camera is recording, when only one person knows the truth. You. Because that's the person you'll spend your entire life living with. Not your teacher, not your classmates, not the people who congratulated your score. Just you. And every small decision quietly becomes part of that relationship. The strange thing is, both students believed they were protecting their future. One protected it by learning. The other protected it by hiding. At first, those two choices looked almost identical. Years later, they would look nothing alike. Because the examination had never been about passing a test. It had always been about preparing for the next difficult decision. And life was already preparing the next one. The road begins to divide. People often imagine that life changes all at once. One promotion, one graduation, one big opportunity. But that's almost never how it happens. Life usually changes so slowly that we don't notice it changing. The two young men certainly didn't. University came and went. There were lectures to attend, assignments to finish, friends to meet, late nights, coffee, stress, dreams about the future. From the outside, their lives still looked surprisingly similar. Both graduated, both found their first jobs, both rented small apartments, both called their parents every weekend. If you had asked anyone, they're doing well. And perhaps they were, just not in the same way. The first young man quickly discovered something uncomfortable. The workplace was nothing like school. Nobody gave him the answers. There were no textbooks, no model solutions, no teacher waiting at the front of the room. Every problem looked different. Every client wanted something different. Every mistake carried a real consequence. During his first month, he made plenty of mistakes. He misunderstood instructions. He asked questions that seemed obvious. Sometimes he stayed late, trying to fix work he should have finished hours earlier. More than once, he wondered if the company had hired the wrong person. But every evening, he went home knowing one thing. Whatever he had learned that day was truly his. No one could take it away. The second young man had a different experience. He was confident. At least, he looked confident. He rarely admitted he didn't understand something. Instead, he became very good at hiding uncertainty. If a colleague explained something complicated, he nodded. If his manager asked, "Do you know how to do this?" he answered, "Of course," even when he didn't. At first, everything seemed fine. People assumed he was capable. He assumed he could figure things out later. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he didn't. But there was one feeling he couldn't escape. Every new project felt like another performance. Not another opportunity to learn. A performance. And performances are exhausting. Because sooner or later, you're afraid someone will notice the difference between confidence and competence. One afternoon, both men received the same assignment. It wasn't especially difficult, but it required patience. The first man spent hours reading manuals, asking questions, and checking every detail. The second searched for the quickest solution. He copied part of an old report, changed a few numbers, and submitted it. The manager thanked them both. Neither received criticism, neither received praise. The day ended. At first glance, the outcome looked identical. But something invisible had happened. The first man had become slightly more capable. The second had become slightly more dependent on shortcuts. Yet tiny differences, repeated over many years, have a remarkable way of changing everything. I've often thought about bamboo. For a long time, it seems as though nothing is happening. You water it, you care for it, you wait. Day after day, month after month, almost no visible growth. Then, it begins rising incredibly fast. People who only see the final stage think the growth happened overnight. It didn't. Most of the work happened beneath the surface. People grow the same way. Real ability is built underground, in the quiet hours, the confusing moments, the embarrassing questions, the failures nobody celebrates. Those invisible days become visible years later. There was one habit that slowly separated the two men. Every Friday evening, the first man stayed for another hour, not because he had to, because he asked himself one simple question. What did I learn this week? Sometimes the answer was disappointing. I made the same mistake twice. Sometimes it was encouraging. I finally understand this process. But every week, he looked honestly at himself. Not to judge himself, to improve. The second man asked a different question. Did anyone notice? If the answer was no, the week felt successful. It sounds like a small difference, but one question builds skill. The other builds anxiety. Several years passed. The first man became someone his colleagues quietly trusted, not because he was brilliant, because he was reliable. If he said, "I'll finish it," he finished it. If he didn't know something, he admitted it. If he made a mistake, he fixed it. People began asking for his opinion, not because he demanded respect, because trust had slowly found him. The second man also received promotions. He dressed well, he spoke confidently. People admired his communication skills. But every promotion made him more nervous. The higher he climbed, the more he feared falling. Every meeting felt like another test. Every difficult question felt dangerous. He wasn't afraid of failing. He was afraid of being discovered. There is a very important difference between those two fears. Someone who fears failure is still trying to grow. Someone who fears being discovered is trying to protect an illusion. One evening, after another long day at work, the second man sat alone in his apartment. He looked at the city lights outside his window. Then he quietly asked himself a question he hadn't thought about for years. When did everything become so exhausting? The strange thing was, his career looked successful. His friends admired him. His parents were proud. His salary had increased, yet peace seemed farther away than ever. He couldn't understand why. The answer had been growing quietly for years. Success built on appearance always asks you to keep performing. Success built on ability allows you to finally breathe. Neither man knew it yet, but life was preparing something neither university nor any examination could have predicted. A moment when someone else's future would depend on the quality of their decisions. And on that day, experience would matter. Character would no longer be enough, because reality has one rule that never changes. It never asks what score you received. It only asks, can you really do the job? Success can hide the truth. A few years later, both men looked successful. If you searched their names online, you would probably reach the same conclusion. Good careers, good salaries, professional photographs, smiling faces, successful lives. That's the strange thing about success. It can hide many things. It can hide loneliness. It can hide fear. It can even hide the truth. One Monday morning, both men arrived at work before anyone else. The first man made himself a cup of coffee. He opened his laptop, reviewed yesterday's notes, looked over a report one last time. There was nothing unusual about his morning. The second man also arrived early, but for a different reason. He hadn't slept very well. A presentation was scheduled for 9 o'clock. His manager would be there. So would several important clients. He had practiced his introduction many times. What worried him wasn't speaking. He was good at speaking. What worried him was the questions afterward, because questions couldn't always be rehearsed. At exactly 9 o'clock, the meeting began. The clients were friendly. The atmosphere was relaxed. Everything went smoothly for the first 20 minutes. Then someone asked a simple question. Can you explain how these numbers were calculated? The room became quiet. The second man smiled politely. He opened another slide. He talked for nearly 2 minutes, yet somehow he never answered the question. Most people in the room didn't notice. But one person did, his manager. Not because the answer was wrong, because there wasn't one. The presentation ended, everyone shook hands, people left the room. Nothing dramatic happened. No one was fired. No one shouted. No one argued. Yet something invisible had changed. Trust had become slightly smaller. And trust, once it begins to shrink, rarely does so all at once. It disappears quietly, conversation by conversation, decision by decision. Across the city, the first man was having a very different morning. A younger colleague walked over to his desk. "I think I made a mistake." The young colleague looked embarrassed. "I've checked it 3 times, and I still can't figure it out." The first man smiled. "Let's look at it together." For nearly an hour, they worked through the problem. Not because he had all the answers, because he knew how to ask the right questions. When they finally found the mistake, the younger colleague laughed with relief. "I can't believe I missed that." The first man shook his head. "You didn't miss it. You found it." Those are two different things. The younger colleague never forgot that sentence. Neither did I, because that's what real knowledge does. It doesn't make people feel small. It helps them become better. One afternoon, the first man's manager stopped by his desk. "I need someone to lead the next project." The office became unusually quiet. Everyone looked up. The manager continued, "It isn't the biggest project we've ever had, but it's the most important. We can't afford mistakes." Without hesitation, he looked at the first man. "I trust your judgment." Not, "I trust your confidence." Not, "I trust your presentation skills." Not, "I trust your resume." I trust your judgment. There are few compliments more valuable than those 4 words, because judgment cannot be memorized. It cannot be copied. It is built through years of honest experience, one decision at a time. The second man also received opportunities, but something strange kept happening. Important projects slowly went to other people. Clients asked for different team members. Meetings happened without him. Nobody explained why. Nobody needed to. People rarely announce when trust begins to disappear. They simply stop depending on you. And that silence can be far more painful than criticism. One evening, both men happened to leave work at the same time. Not together, just at the same hour. The first man walked home slowly. He was tired. It had been a long week. But there was a quiet satisfaction in his exhaustion. He had solved difficult problems, learned new things, helped someone else grow. He slept well that night. The second man was tired too, but his tiredness felt different. His body was exhausted. His mind refused to rest. He replayed conversations, wondered whether someone had noticed, thought about tomorrow's meeting. Prepared answers to questions nobody had asked. Sleep became difficult, not because work was hard, because pretending is harder than learning. There is something I have noticed over the years. Real ability creates peace. Not because capable people know everything. They don't. They simply know they can figure things out. That confidence doesn't come from always being right. It comes from surviving moments of being wrong, again and again, until mistakes stop feeling like threats and start feeling like teachers. The second man had spent years protecting an image. From a distance, both journeys looked successful. Up close, they couldn't have been more different. One had built a career, the other had built a foundation. And life has a habit of testing foundations long before anyone notices the building standing above them. Soon, both men would face a decision that no examination, no university, and no promotion could prepare them for. A decision where another person's future would depend entirely on who they had quietly become.